Abby Milberg. I'm a front-end architect at Third and Grove. We're a digital agency that does everything from Drupal development to design and in between. Today's talk is about taking images to the next level. So what does that mean? What we're after here is how to give the content editor greater control over images. In Drupal, you tend to, by default, have two approaches. You can let them upload an image and let it be their 6,000 pixel thing they took on their iPhone. Or you can set an image style, which forces every image into one shape and size and configuration. What we're after is giving the user a little more control, let them also have options that will keep the design consistent and performant and secure. So it's about finding that middle ground. This could also be called the story of my design director and I learning not to kill each other. When he designs logos that have different widths, different heights, images with different dimensions, that sort of thing. So I jest, but it's been a really good lesson in developing some of these techniques. So I'd like to start with a very quick review of responsive images in Drupal 8. I'm not going to speak about this for long, but I'd just like to reiterate that breakpoint and what we had as the picture module in Drupal 7 are core in Drupal 8. So you can now include breakpoints as part of your theme and have responsive image styles with no extra trouble. So that's a really big plus in this latest platform. So the question we come to, should all images be treated the same? This right here is what kicked off most of the things I am going to be talking about on this session. We have this logo grid. In the upper left is what our designer designed. It's a grid of logos for our company site. And you can see that the logos are all different shapes and sizes. And in the lower right, you can see what Drupal spat out by default. When I created 6-column grid with some padding, it doesn't look the same as the one in the upper left, because even though these images are all the same size, they don't look like it because of their aspect ratios. So we developed a technique here to create a field so that the content editor can adjust the spacing based on orientation. This is appropriate for instances where you don't want to crop your images. So logos are a really good one. Headshots or something might be another one. Anything where you cannot risk just cropping the content willy-nilly. We let the user choose from some predefined options. You can see here in my example, we've created a field for the image itself, as well as a field for the orientation. And then we use some CSS and preprocess functions to make that happen. So I'm going to demonstrate. Here we have a logo grid, like the one shown in my other slide. Obviously, this one is just as fancy. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this presentation mode. If I go to edit one of these, if I go to edit the shark, you can see right now I have that this is vertical, which it is. If I switch this orientation to horizontal, publish that, and go back to that grid, refresh, now it thinks that those are both horizontally oriented and they're both the same width. So you can see how giving this control lets the user create something that's more visually optimal while things are not technically equal. So how are we doing this in code? Oh. So this is happening in a preprocess node file, or a preprocess function on the node. What we're doing is when we have the field that is get image orientation, we're simply adding it as a class to the node. This is the teaser view, but you wouldn't have to necessarily do it that way. These are obviously very simplified examples for the presentation. We're simply adding it as a class, and then in my CSS, you can see if it's normally, there's no padding. If it's orientation vertical, it's max width 50%. If it's orientation square, for instance, we would have a max width of 75%. So just giving the user that power to choose the spacing. Okay, so what if we want to do this with actual image styles? Because when I was developing this technique, this is all well and good for things like logos, but you wouldn't want to do this for something like a photograph where you wanted choices. You would obviously want to use an image style. So I used a very similar technique there. I used, again, a field where the content editor could choose from several image styles and then adjusted the image accordingly in a preprocess function. So if I go to, here I have a demo of this file. So here I have a photo. And you can see there's the image, and you can choose a crop, landscape or portrait. You could use as many options here as you would like, but these are the ones I did for the demo. If I switch this to landscape, now the image is showing at a landscape style. And those are simply traditional image styles like you would see anywhere else. You know, focal point, landscape, portrait. I'll talk about focal point in a minute. And then, once again, in our preprocess function, this time we don't even need CSS or node template or anything. It's simply testing for the value of that image cropped field. And because I only have two options here, we're changing the image style only if it isn't the default. But you could easily set it to any other image style you wanted. And just by editing this, it will display as horizontal now. Everyone with me so far, feel free to raise hands, ask questions. Okay. Oh, Carl?
One odd thing about it is what I've noticed with Drupal is, I mean, I think when you go out to a lot of major media sites, for example, you can click and you can see the original image. Is that actually something that can be implemented fairly well? Because I know when you have displays like this, can you get back to the original image if you wanted to provide that to users?
I would imagine that that would be possible with a preprocess function, or possibly even with display settings. I believe when you display an image in a node's display settings, you can link to the original file. I haven't had occasion to try it though. So, one note about cropping images and giving users these choices. Has anyone ever had this happen to them? Yeah, I think we've all had that, where the mock-up shows a beautiful banner image, horizontal, full screen, etc., and then the client gives you some grainy scanned bitmap from 1998. Yeah, so there's a module, actually, a contrib module that I find really helpful for that. It's called Focal Point. I take no credit for it, but I find it really useful in situations like these. Whoops, where's my node? So I'm using focal point on this. Both of those image styles I showed before, you may have noticed, were focal point. All it does is add these options where, can everyone see the plus sign here on the bird? Not my mouse, but the plus sign that's right on the bird's head. I know it's a little bit small. But what focal point does, sorry about that. What focal point does is lets you pick the most important part of the image and ensures that no matter what the image style is, assuming you have focal point enabled on that image style, that it won't get cropped out. So it even lets you show that on all of the existing, if you can see on all existing focal point image styles what your image will look like. So here it's telling me I have these two image styles, that it would crop the bird's head like this on focal point portrait, like this on landscape, and here's the original image. So by default, if I wasn't using focal point, it would probably, if I was using an image style with these dimensions of the portrait, probably half the bird would get chopped off. So this is a really neat tool, and just to demonstrate, this is throwing me off. if I move the focal point down to these bushes over here, oh, that's not useful because it's horizontal.
Refresh.
Yeah. Yeah. Where's my toolbar at? There you go. So it's a pretty cool tool to stop that sort of thing from happening.
You created those two image styles, though, right?
I did. I can show you how that works if you would like.
Do you know if focal point's available in Drupal 7 or just 8?
It's available in 7, actually. I got my start using it in 7, and I believe it actually only recently became ready for production on 8, although don't quote me on that. But it is ready for production on 8 now. So focal point image styles are very similar to any other image styles. If I go to add one, can everyone see okay, or should I zoom in? So when I select an effect, instead of, there's normal scale and crop and normal crop, now there's also focal point crop and focal point scale and crop. And it works just like anything else, or any other normal image style. So it's really easy to implement, and I find that users are really happy with it. It's especially great when you're doing responsive images that don't, where the aspect ratio isn't actually the same between breakpoints. So for instance, if your banner image is very short and wide on desktop and then more square on mobile, it's great for automatically cropping the image so it looks good all over the map, because it used to be that we had to have people upload separate images and it was just a mess. Sorry, did I hear a question? Yeah?
So oftentimes you'll have one image crop on the node and then another image crop on a view. But the only place to set the focal point is in the node edit screen.
That's right.
I've run into problems with any more than one image style actually addressing the focal point itself. In the preview, it'll give me the right
really?
display, but then in the view, it won't. Have you run across that at all?
I actually haven't. Yeah, I'd be interested to talk afterwards about that because I haven't encountered that.
Cool. Maybe my combination logic.
Okay, so are there any more questions on the choosing aspect ratios or image styles of images section before I move on? Okay. Next section is about SVGs with our nice blurry ping over there to make my point. So going back to this same image grid of logos that we had earlier, when you have a grid of logos, it'd be really nice if they were sharp and crisp, because most logos exist as an SVG. It's 2017. And of course, Drupal doesn't support SVG images out of the box, which I know a lot of people have found really frustrating. So of course the pros are, vector images are sharper, and inline SVGs, if you are working with those, can be modified with JavaScript and CSS to do all sorts of fun things. On the flip side, SVGs aren't always available, even today, and there are some potential security risks, which is why Drupal and some other CMSs still don't allow them out of the box. However, sometimes we want to do them anyway. So, as I said, they're not supported in the core image field. None of the core image functions work in them. So when you go into the, I'll be with 1 second, yeah. When you go into the Drupal API, any function that starts with the image class will not work on SVGs. And so there are two workarounds here. There's a contributed module, and there's a custom solution I came up with that The contributed module in question was not at the time ready for production yet. It is now, but there are some pros and cons to both, so I'll go into that. Can I address your?
Oh, sure. I was just wondering what would be the security risk.
I'll go into that in a minute. So the first option is the custom solution I came up with, which is you create a file field, you limit it to allowed file types to SVGs. We use another pre-process function to get the path and description, and we use a field template to essentially stick those into an image tag. It's fairly simple. It's not honestly that elegant. I don't like building a tag like that in a template, but as I said, the core API for images doesn't play well with SVGs. So if we look at that, I have a field here called, it's a file field, as you can see, SVG image. SVG image, this is the only allowed extension. I'm enabling the description field because we're going to use that as the alt text since we want to have those available for all images. And when I go back to the content type level and the display, I'm working mostly with the teaser in this instance. We're just going to leave it at generic file. So once again, we go into our pre-process template. And this time we're doing, our theme template, blah, words. We go to our pre-process field function. And if we are working with the SVG image field, we are going to pull out the file URL as a variable. And the description is a variable, is alt text. And we're going to pass those to the template, which now looks like this, if everyone can see that. By the way, all of this code is in a GitHub repo, and I'm going to put all of the links online at the end of this talk, so don't worry too much about trying to copy down the exact syntax and everything. So that is the custom way I came up with. The second way is a really cool contrib module called SVG Formatter. The name kind of speaks for itself. So they had a similar idea. They're also using a file field, and what they do is they make SVG Formatter available as an actual, like a render option. So content types. When I created this SVG formatter field, which is in fact a file field, this is just a format option. And it works very well. So something it does that my technique does not, it can actually render your code inline as an SVG tag instead of just as the source of an image tag, which has some pros and cons we'll talk about in a minute. It doesn't let you custom define your alt text, but it automatically sets your file name as alt text. And you can set width and height at the content type level, which is, I'm sure has some use cases. I think as a themer, I tend to not want to use that option, but I could understand why some people might. So, pros and cons. Okay, so I'll be honest. The only thing I've got from my version is that you can control the alt text. You can control that no matter what you want it to say from the description field. That's very granular. The SVG formatter module, I think it's really cool that you can do inline SVGs. As we spoke about before, you can do CSS and JavaScript on inline SVGs. Less work to set up. You can control that width and height. Now, let's get back to the security thing. So the upshot of this is you are probably fine. But here are the risks of SVGs with websites. It's mostly around inline SVGs. And the main risk is when JavaScript is involved. And I do want to preface this with I am not, a security expert, so please do your own research on this if you're, going to be implementing this on a major site. But from what I've been able to learn, the main risks are around JavaScript in an inline SVG. So if you know your source and you're not trying to do JavaScript in an SVG, you trust your content editors, you will probably be okay. That said, it's a risk you have to assess for yourself. Keeping in mind that, trusting your content editors may also mean do you trust them to know if there is a security issue with something they find on the web? So you do have to watch it a little bit. This SVG formatter module, which is, allows you to do inline SVGs, their current dev version includes an SVG sanitizer, which I believe works to mitigate that somewhat, but that's in their dev version. So, long story short, with everything else on the internet, be careful, assess the risks based on your project, your profile, your users. It's got its pros and cons. But you are much less likely to have an issue with one that is in an image tag. Okay, so another question. What if there's not an SVG available? Oh, sorry, did I see a question? No? Okay. So that image grid I was talking about earlier had a lot of great SVG logos, but we didn't actually have access to all of the logos as SVGs. So I went to, I came to our designer. I was very proud that I had figured out how to make Drupal play nice with SVGs and how to pick the aspect ratios so everything would line up how he wanted. And he's like, well, I don't have all of them as SVGs. Awesome. So we did a fallback. Basically, it's again some pre-process logic, or actually, pre-process and or template logic. We created two fields. We created an SVG field, and we created a bitmap fallback field. So if we go back to our shark, you can see, as you might not have guessed from the title, that bitmap shark is in fact not an SVG. He is a bitmap. He's a JPEG, but he's a fallback. We didn't fill in an SVG here, so that's fine. And he's got his orientation and everything. If we choose to upload an SVG, now, I only have this logic currently set up on the teaser view for purposes of this demonstration, but we're going to see, there we go, it fell back, the shark hid itself because we have an SVG after all. So the way we're doing this, this time, we're not even using pre-process, though you could just as easily do it in pre-process. This time, I'm simply doing it in the twig template, where I say, if there's no SVG, render the bitmap fallback, and then render everything else without the bitmap fallback. So, or the orientation, because that was, we didn't want to show that text for that either. So I'm running a little short on time, so I can take as many questions as people have. But what I do want to emphasize here is, as I hope you've been able to see, mix and match these techniques. Make them work for you. In most of these examples, I only showed 2 or 3 options. The logo grid that I keep referencing, in reality, it has 5 orientation options, because our designer's that picky. I love him. He's an amazing designer. Drupal doesn't do that out of the box. That's why I'm learning these things. You know, I've been showing some regular image styles. They can just as easily be responsive image styles. You know, run kint, adjust the pre-process function accordingly, set a different image style, or responsive image style instead of image style. So on and so forth. Are there any questions? Any questions, concerns, ideas? Yes, please, ma'am.
Okay, so in the field where you're letting them select the orientation, is that just a field that is a text list?
That's a great question.
Are you using image style selector?
I am not.
Not image style selector because you're doing it in a template, so I assume it's just
Right. That is just a select or a list of text, as you said. So I've got image crop, list text, and I was rendering the output as the keys.
Okay, yeah, I saw that.
So
okay.
yeah, and you, as I said, you can put as many things here as you want.
So just as I'm doing something similar, but as the key, I'm using the machine name of the image style, and I'm actually feeding that to the pre-process. So when it's building the image,
Nice.
it's using that the machine name for the style. I'm just feeding that in there so I can let them select their image style without having to use image style selector, which has its own bunch of really problems.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's great. I frankly, I didn't know when I created the one that I was initially working with, how many how many options we were going to wind up wanting to add. So I didn't wind up going that route, but that's a great way to cut down on the code complexity and that extra render time. Yeah. Carl, did I see your hand?
Yes. About the security risks, that's generally limited to, say, for example, if you're getting an SVG to post on the site or linking to one that's from a questionable source, right? If I go ahead, for example, and I create artwork straight out of the box and export as an SVG, that's not where the risk comes in.
Yeah, that's exactly like you say. There's really no risk in you create a vector image in Sketch or Illustrator or something. You save it as an SVG. You upload it to the web. That's fine. The problem is not every site is going to have users who are aware of the risks. We would like to hope that there's not going to be a malicious person with content editing abilities, but there might very well be one who doesn't know the risks in going to Google image search, finding that shark as a bitmap from goodness knows where, and uploading it to your site. So that's the real risk, and you have to assess. Are you working on a giant federal website that someone's going to target? Are you working on, this is our company website that I built this grid for. So I know exactly where all the files came from. It's all other developers working on it. I can afford to play loosey-goosey with that.
Famous last words.
Yeah, okay, yes. Good. Kat has an excellent point. But no, it's about what you can do, and you have to evaluate your risk profile. If you created it, it's fine. But yeah, Kat.
I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but when you are showing that you have, for example, 5 different image styles on the site that you're working with, if you're dealing with responsive images, you haven't found any workaround for having 10 different image styles then, right?
So that would be correct. Luckily, the instance where I did 5 was actually the one where it was using CSS, because it was those SVG logos, which won't take an image style, and then even the bitmap logos are tiny and don't want to crop. But yeah, I think unless some of those sizes happened to converge with each other, I think you're right.
Have you had any issues getting, with having clients provide retina-friendly images? Or have you been focusing more on getting the base image and then modifying the display of it?
I think there's always a challenge in getting clients to provide the best image possible, and our strategy is always to get the highest res image we can out of them. And then crop it to what we need, let Drupal crop it to what we need, or, a couple times we've actually we told clients that we wanted the largest image possible. They took it to heart and sent us stock photos that were like 10 megabytes or something. And so we were trying to upload content with a script and everything went kaput. But I think, usually I let Drupal do that. I try to avoid scaling up, but does that answer your question?
It does.
Cool. Any other questions? Carl?
When it comes down to performance, I know at times it can be a judgment call because, I tend to do a lot of illustration work, and I know where I'm coming down to is if you have a very complex SVG, the file size oftentimes can be larger than it would be even for bitmap. Is there a time when you make a judgment call when you come down to situations like that? Or whether you're going to be providing an SVG or a bitmap just when it comes down to bandwidth performance?
Absolutely. I have not encountered a situation where somebody wanted to do a very complex image, as you say, with on a site as an SVG. If so, that would definitely be a performance concern. Hopefully, most logos and those sorts of things have as few anchor points as possible. Mm-hmm. It can definitely be messy if you have a very, very complex Illustrator file or similar that you've exported as an SVG. I'd say you have to watch your. You have to consider your use case. Do you need that illustration at that resolution? Is there any way to optimize it? And watch your site's performance, watch your analytics. That's always the answer at the end of the day. So yeah.
I can add to that as well. So like the SVGs are really useful. Inline SVGs in particular are really useful if you need to do modifications to the SVG, changing the fill color or some kind of animation on the SVG. But if you don't have a use for that, you may as well just use a retina-friendly JPEG or PNG.
True.
Yeah, very true. Yes, ma'am?
So with the focal point, you had the difference there between the landscape and the portrait, but how does the responsiveness of that work? So you might want the landscape on a large desktop with the portrait on a...
Yeah.
So how does that all work together?
Right.
Is that
So...
just style sheets or...
So for this instance, because I was sort of just demonstrating focal point real quickly, I didn't make them responsive picture groups, but which if I were, doing this on a production site, I definitely would. As far as focal point goes, you can create. Have you worked with picture before? So same as you would create normal image styles for the different sizes, and then create a picture grouping with your breakpoints, you can just use focal point image styles instead of those normal image styles, and it'll work exactly the same.
Okay.
Yeah. And as I mentioned briefly before, it's great, especially if your responsive image styles aren't going to be exact scales of each other, so you don't wind up cropping someone's face on mobile or.
Yeah, we've had that happen.
Yeah, I think we all have. Alrighty. Any other questions? All right then. Thank you very much. Thank you. And you do not have to jot all of these down, but here are. I've posted a link to this GitHub repo, which includes these slides and the theme and a feature with all of the configuration that I just showed. These are links to some more in-depth tutorials on some of these issues, as well as the contrib modules I mentioned. And the logo grid that I keep mentioning is on our company's work page, so there's me plugging my company. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.